Welcome to the Leaders in Housing Counseling call, our first call in November. Can you believe we've gotten this far through the year already? Hear the series of groans already. Things are moving quickly, and so we're going to get started in the call. We have a lot of ground to cover, and looks like we have a very healthy start already with people participating. So let's get started with a quick review of today's agenda. Lots of movement now on federal funding because we now have a federal budget. Matthew will give you a full rundown. I'm going to give you a whole bunch of quick housing counseling updates, including a little bit about NFMC allocations or submissions and payment plans. I know this has been an issue a number of you have been grappling with, and I think we can be a little bit helpful on that. Going to go just a quick highlight on the Leaders in Housing Counseling National Meeting on the 10th, and people are signing up, so that's great. I'm so glad to see this. We're ahead of last year, ahead of the last 2 years, so that's great. And if you haven't signed up now, please do. It'll be great. Lots of excitement about it. But the most of our call is going to be on student debt and advocacy and what the role of housing counseling can be. This is a culmination of the 3 webinars that we've done. Had 750 people participating, counselors participating. It was really great, but obviously lots of issues still to be dealt with, and we've got a great team of people who are going to help us think that through. And then a quick plug on joining NHRC, and we've added to the things that value the membership, and so I'll do a very quick run through on that. But let's dive in. So let's get started with federal funding. So Matthew, what's the story?
All right, so I imagine folks have heard at this point that somewhat surprisingly, the Congress and the White House were able to reach a budget agreement. It was kind of John Boehner's, former Speaker Boehner's parting gift to the country when he left as Speaker. So they reached a 2-year budget agreement. Folks will remember that the issue had been previously that because of the sequestration, the spending caps were so low that appropriators, really Republicans and Democrats both, felt like there was just not enough funding available to them to adequately fund the programs that needed to be funded. That led to, in the Senate, the NFMC program being zeroed out, and Democrats had been pushing really hard for those spending caps to be lifted. So that was included as part of this 2-year budget agreement. So it means for this year, there's going to be an additional $25 billion available for domestic programs. And I think the number is about $19 billion additional for next year. So that means that there's obviously a big chunk of money for appropriators to play with. So the next step will be for the chair of the appropriations committees to make allocations to the subcommittees. So that hasn't happened yet. So we don't know how much additional funding there is for transportation and HUD. But it means that there's at least a chance of us getting some of the funding restored for the NFMC program. So folks remember that the House funded the program at $42 million, which was down from $50 million last year, while the Senate zeroed it out. So really the work for us to do is, well, it's somewhat twofold. So it's working with the House, and in particular House Republicans, and really convincing them to really own that $42 million, dollar number that they had included in their budget. You know, obviously they saw value in the NFMC program. They saw continuing need, or they wouldn't have funded it. So we really need them to own that number, and when they sit down and negotiate with the Senate, to really stand by that $42 million number. On the other side, obviously, we need to work with Senate leadership, and that in particular is Senator Collins from Maine, who's the chair of the THUD subcommittee, and Senator Reed from Rhode Island, who's the ranking member, and really persuade them that now that they have some additional money to play with, that this is one of the programs that they should put some additional funding into. And it's a little bit tricky because, as many folks on the call know, There's a lot of HUD programs that were badly underfunded. The home program in particular, folks know, was not zeroed out, but was all but zeroed out. So there are a lot of priorities still, and that program is certainly a priority for Senator Collins. So there's work to do, but that's what we've been working on for the last week, and will continue working on until they have a budget deal in place. We met a few weeks ago with Congressman Joyce in his district office outside of Cleveland. We're going to be meeting with Chairman Diaz-Ballard's staff in Miami, and we're going to introduce them to housing counseling staff and clients who will share their stories and let them know about the value of the NFMC program. We're having conversations with all the members on the relevant subcommittees. But really the key at this point is trying to get members talking to the chairs of the two, so Chairman Diaz-Ballard on the House side and Senator Collins on the Senate side, and having those conversations, personal conversations, saying, look, I'm hearing from my constituents that this is an issue that this is a program that they support and would like to see funded. So this is probably going to be unfolding quickly. They need to reach it. December 11th is the deadline for the temporary CR that they had passed. So there needs to be a deal in place by then. But really, it's going to be kind of, I mean, it's fast and furious over as a month of negotiations can be. So we will keep you updated on what's happening. Bruce, is there anything you wanted to add on it?
I think you've really covered it.
All right.
Very important, and certainly if Matthew calls you or emails you, please respond. We're really in the thick of it, and we're making some headway in a difficult situation, and I think we're really doing a lot of work. We're coordinating with other groups, with the intermediaries and with HPF, and really working hard to try to make this work. NCLR has been very helpful in especially the lining up a meeting with Diaz-Ballard's key staff members, but this is an all-hands-on-deck effort. Good. Thank you very much. So some very quick updates. So one issue that's been going through has been NFMC. I understand that some groups have only gotten paid for only half of their submissions. And the situation is that that NeighborWorks has always had some geographic targeting requirements and areas of greatest need, and this year also of extraordinary need. And these are commitments they make to Congress. And it turns out that when agencies are making submissions, if they're not meeting some of the geographic goals, there's a need to step back and figure out what happened. And I sort of want to paint this in somewhat of a, this is not a disaster light. NeighborWorks is trying to be responsible and trying to deal with their commitments and obligations to Congress. We do, I know I've been in your shoes, that I know that it's not, you can't always control where your clients come from, and it's a challenge that counseling agencies have. And just sort of the general, how do you manage this situation? Well, I mean, the real thing is to talk with NeighborWorks and explain the situation. So if you've, especially in the areas of extraordinary need, if you haven't met those goals, but you've gotten numbers from other places, did you do the marketing in the areas of extraordinary need? If not, you should go ahead and do that and try to fill the goals that way. If you did and it was kind of a dry hole, then go back to them and document where clients have come from and why those areas are the places that actually now are extraordinary need. I mean, the environment does change, plants close, cities have real estate market crises, these things happen. The point is to go through the process with NeighborWorks to either make sure that we've done the proper marketing, and if so, then to document where other extraordinary need opportunities are. And I mean, I can't predict what will all happen, but I do know that NeighborWorks is sympathetic to people's situations and really trying to figure out the best solutions while still meeting the obligations to Congress. So very quickly on other issues on certification. So HUD is mum's the word on this because rulemaking, they're not allowing it to tell us. But I do have a sense that we may not get our certification stuff in November or maybe even December, only because I've tried to schedule conversations around it and have not been able to. So, just a heads up, nobody's told me anything. In fact, it's been very, very tight-lipped, but just to be aware that certification may not come down in November as we had thought. On the mortgage servicing survey, thank you everybody. We had 200 responses on the dot, and Matthew's compiling the information right now. It looks like some very clear patterns are coming out of it. This is incredibly helpful, and really appreciate everybody's participation. Matthew will have kind of report available soon, and CFPB is very eager to see it as well, and we'll try to circulate it broadly at the point it's available. We've had a whole series of meetings some of you have participated in with Fannie Mae, with FHA, with Freddie Mac, and with Treasury. And one of the big issues has been around this housing counseling data fields on the mortgage application. We're getting some pretty strong pushback from lenders and from Fannie Freddie about this. And we'll be able to dive more deeply into this in other venues. But I mean, the quick message here is that while there's a lot of sympathy for getting this in, we're getting a lot of technical and sort of logistical issues getting thrown at us. We certainly we'll continue pushing on this, and there certainly will be some kind of resolution that will make this work. I'm hoping that it'll still be in the application, but we'll see. We're having a whole similar set of problems around getting preferred language into the application. Again, I think everybody understands the importance and value of it. Lots of fears among lenders about liability concerns, and a little baffling to us, I think, because the liability exists because they haven't dealt with these populations well. So, but this isn't quite the slam dunk we thought it was even 6 months ago, but we're really in the thick of meeting with the key players to try to figure out how to make this all work. The last quick note is that we have been deeply involved in these conversations around what will happen with loss mitigation after HAMP goes away. December 2016 is the date currently. We're encouraging an extension, but that looks like an uphill push. And the big theme here for us is a couple things. One is that resolutions ought to be income-based, documented resolutions. There was a push for streamlined, which means no docs and based on market-based or close to market-based loan modifications. That doesn't match well with what people's individual needs are, and so we are pretty much, looks like the conversation seems to all be around income-based resolutions right now, with only streamline being a very small part of the conversation, so that's generally good. And the other part of this conversation is can we build housing counseling in more effectively so that it's built into the funding and a long-term way for which people come through the pipeline. And while there's interest in this, we have lots of issues to work out, and we're really on the beginning of the conversation. But the good thing is we're really at the table, and we'll continue pushing. So sorry to do that so quickly, but wanted to make sure that people at least had a quick update on where things stood that we've been talking about. Very quickly also, so on December 10th, we're going to have our national meeting. It's looking very, very exciting. We'll have Sarah Jarek there all day. She's very interested in a number of topics. We're thinking about conversations and some real sort of deep thinking about how to get fee-for-service to become more routinely done and more effectively in, especially in originations, but originations and servicing. So we have a deep conversation on that and some conversations about the future of housing counseling and the trends. We have invites to key people that affect our work, and we know they're working on getting it into the schedule, so hopefully we'll have some good guests as well. We're going to have the morning session will be with NHRC members and lunch as well, and then from 1 to 5:30 will be for everybody and all, and then we'll have a reception at 6 o'clock on, probably until about 8:30 or 9. So, you know, if you've ever been to one of these, they're really kind of fun. They're really great because you get to be with your peer leaders and really have a chance to deeply dive into our work. So please register early, so that's good. We've actually got a lot of people already started registering. We're way ahead of previous years, so I'm pleased about that. But glad to have, we still have room for you, so please, if you haven't registered, please do so. And shoot any questions to me that you've got. Okay, let's move on to student debt advocacy. We have just gone through a series of trainings and webinars. Over 750 housing counselors have participated in all 3 sessions. It's been a terrific, I've certainly learned a lot, very, very valuable. And we will do an update in January. There's going to be some changes in the programs that the Department of Education is doing, and we want to bring people up to date on that, and we'll do those. We're planning to do those in January. Hats off to our trainers who've been great, and there are 2 of them are joining us for the session today to talk about advocacy, and especially what can we do to help improve the student debt situation for our clients and housing consumers. Natalia Abrams, who I'm sure you've gotten to get to know pretty well, isn't able to join us. She's on an airplane. She got delayed in the airport, and we all know how frustrating that is. But we'll have Cody Hunanian from Student Debt Crisis, and we have Maggie Thompson from Higher Ed Not Debt with us today to talk about some of the advocacy issues. So, welcome all of you, and Maggie, do you want to open it up?
Sure thing. Thanks, Bruce. I know many of you that have been on the previous calls, you know, have heard a little bit about Higher Ed Not Debt, but really briefly, I think that I was most excited for this advocacy call because Higher Ed Not Debt, we are less a direct service organization and more a coalition advocacy campaign pushing for policy change that will help borrowers with student loan debt. So a large part of our work is really lifting up the voice of borrowers themselves, but also making sure that the different constituencies that are impacted by student debt sort of have their stories told. So we work a lot, you know, for example, with teachers, because the teaching profession is having trouble keeping teachers in the profession, especially young teachers, because of student loan debt. We are partnered with several farmers groups because farmers are having trouble getting startup capital because of their debt-to-income ratio and their student loan debt. And on that note, I think that there's just a huge opportunity for the housing counselor community to engage on the issue of student loan debt in what will be a very powerful way. You know, when student debt is talked about, there are a lot of stories that have come out talking about student debt and its impact on the housing market and how people with student debt are having trouble getting into homes. And that most of the coverage of that has been really from a macroeconomic level, sort of a 30,000-foot view of it and, you know, something that talks about the economy more broadly. And I just think that housing counselors, you all, as people that are on the front lines and are seeing what's happening in communities every day, if you all are sharing your stories about how you see student debt impacting your work and what you do, I think that could be an incredibly powerful voice to insert into this policy conversation and really push to pass some of the policies that we'll be talking through today. So we just wanted to give a quick overview of a few of the advocacy solutions that we thought might be a good fit for the housing counselor community, and we're really excited to work with you all moving forward to really lift up this issue in your community. And Bruce, I'll let you take it away for the first advocacy ask.
Okay, and looks like the slides haven't transferred. Do you want to just pick up them, Matthew?
I think there we go.
Okay, good. All right, good. All right, we're back into Ken. So one big issue which has come up on the webinars, and I think people have raised on the initial call we had in July around this, was this whole concept of when the mortgage industry is underwriting a loan, how they value the student debt payments in the debt-to-income ratio, the total DTI ratio. And right now, I mean, and so the advocacy ask here is create a housing industry underwriting standard, which for income-driven repayment plans and deferments for student loans, and we should think of these separately, deferment from the repayment plan as separate issues in these conversations. So let's go back to the next slide. We're hearing different things about how different lenders and investors handle the income-based programs and deferments. So I'll give you a couple examples of what we're familiar with, and we'll continue pursuing this and trying to figure out what the standards are, and also where lenders are adding their own overlays or standards on top of it. Our understanding is that with Fannie Mae, if you're doing they used to have whichever is greater, either 2% of the unpaid balance or the amount that is due for the on the payments that are that without an income-based program. Let me say this a little bit more clearly. So with Fannie Mae, they initially had the rule was that you either, if somebody's on an income-based program, that they would, instead of using the income-based amount, they initially had 2% of the unpaid balance or the full payment, whichever was greater, without the income-based payment, what it would be without that. And Fannie reduced that to 1%, which is much more affordable. 2% is quite a bit of money for many people. 1% actually is a helpful reduction. Still is often, in many cases, going to put you over the line of what you would be paying on an income-based program, depending on what your situation is, but certainly better. FHA used the 2% rule if you are in a deferred program, but our understanding is that FHA permits the lender to use the income-based program if they're on an income-based program itself. And then we don't know what Freddie does, and certainly other lenders have their own sets of rules outside of those brackets. What we're hearing in the field is that there's quite a few people that see 2% as the 2% of the unpaid balance as the standard. So how that plays out in practice, as you can see from this chart, so if you've at $35,000 in student debt, your payment would be $359 under, depending on what your income situation is, but typical payment would be $359 but under the 2% rule, that puts you up at 700. You can see the other numbers depending on how large your student loans are that you're carrying, but that has a huge effect on how it plays out for people on figuring out what their DTI is, and obviously that has a big impact on whether they can buy a house or not. And what's strange about this is that if you think about it in terms of the actual loan itself, where you are an income-based program, your debts are forgiven after 20 or 25 years, depending on which program you're in. With the public service option, you're actually forgiven at 10 years, so that these are debts that will disappear for the borrower. The payments can rise under the income-based programs if your income rises, but it rises proportionately, so you can certainly afford more of the payment without affecting your mortgage payment because your income is up, and certainly can go down again as well. I mean, so those fluctuations really solve the kind of underwriting credit risk problems that lenders have. So it is pretty strange that they have not chosen to use the actual amount. So this is an issue we'll try to raise with Fannie, Freddie, FHFA, and with CFPB, and see if these are ones that we can have an impact on. So Cody or Maggie, whoever else is next to go.
Yeah, that would be me. The next policy that we wanted to talk through with all of you, and that you may have heard of in the news, is this idea of student loan refinancing. A lot of people don't know that you cannot currently refinance your student loans. And the talking points on this are really simple. You should be able to refinance your student loans just like you can refinance a mortgage or any other type of consumer debt. And right now there are limited private programs for refinancing for very high income borrowers that exist, but for the majority of student loan borrowers, they have no options to refinance their loans. And you've probably heard about this from sort of one of the main champions of this issue on the next slide is Senator Elizabeth Warren, who introduced the Bank on Students Loan Refinancing Act, which essentially was a federal bill that would allow students to refinance their student loans, whether those loans were federal loans or private loans, doesn't matter. It essentially would establish an authority to allow refinancing. And you can see just in the state of California alone, a huge number of student loan borrowers could benefit from student loan refinancing. And refinancing is something that it's a great policy because it's simple to explain, but also if we want to take a look at the next slide, one of the reasons that student loan refinancing would help so many people is because for a lot of student loans, these interest rates are really quite high. There have been a number of fights over the past several years where Congress was trying to double the interest rates on federal student loans. Now they are set each year on a variable rate, so you can see sort of the current rates here, but also what they've been in the past. So you have some people, especially those with graduate loans, that are up around 6.8, 7.9. There are a lot of borrowers that are struggling with loans that have those high interest rates. And one of the things, just as you're thinking about this issue and talking about this issue, that I always think about is, I do have a mortgage, and my mortgage has a much lower interest rate than any of these different types of student loans. And, but nobody ever calls my mortgage a form of aid. It's a loan, right? It's something I have to pay back with interest. But in the student lending space, it's almost as if the culture around student loans is such that people have been sort of conditioned to view these loans as aid. They're referred to as financial aid. So I think being very aggressive about pushing hard to talk about these loans and make sure that people are aware of these high interest rates to make the case for refinancing is just such an important sort of first step to helping student loan borrowers. If we want to go to the next slide, if Senator Warren's legislation were to pass, the average student loan borrower in this country would see their monthly payment drop by about 14%, which could just be a huge have a huge impact on someone, especially if there's someone that's, trying to figure out their month-to-month budget and figure out whether or not they can afford something like a mortgage. So refinancing, because the interest rates on these loans are so high, is a policy that is not only simple to talk about, but could have an immediate and very positive impact for student loan borrowers. So this is something that's happening in the federal level in DC, and the one thing that I would also flag is there are a number of states that are considering passing laws at the state level to refinance student loans at the state level. So that's something that, whether it's at the state or federal level, our partners are pushing very hard on as a great first step to help student loan borrowers.
Maggie, could you just elaborate a little more on what that would look like at the state level? So, for example, would it be California passing a law that would allow any California residents to refinance?
Yep. So it would be, Wisconsin actually just had a hearing in their state House and Senate on this week, and essentially it would use the state's bonding authority to establish a student loan authority that a borrower could refinance their loan into. And from our perspective, especially for borrowers that have private student loans, which typically have, much higher interest rates and very few options for modifications, a state-based refinancing authority could be a great way for that borrower to not only lower their interest rate, but get into a public authority that, if done right, could have more consumer protections for the borrower. So this is something that, like I said, this is a newer issue, and both the federal and state governments are considering it, but it's something that, we sort of have to redouble the push on, because it's ridiculous that people are locked into these high interest rates on their student loans. And unless there are any questions on that, I think I can kick it over to Cody, I believe.
Yeah, thank you so much, Maggie. Before I move on to the next ask, I did just want to back up something you just mentioned. It's definitely very critical that if we talk about refinancing at state level, that we support student loan champions like Elizabeth Warren. You were totally right, Maggie, that refinancing is great if it's done properly. And we're seeing on the state level already some states taking on the refinancing hurdle, and some are doing better than others, while some are resorting to private lenders and different kind of loan structuring schemes that kind of take you out of the federal system. So definitely key to pay attention to leaders that are actually in the best interest for student loan borrowers like Elizabeth Warren. So thank you so much for that. So the next ask we were going to talk about is a simple one. It's replacing the multiple income-driven plans with a single streamlined plan. I don't have to remind you guys, you've seen all the charts that we've showed you, just how complicated the repayment structure can be. There's already today now going to be 5 repayment plans with all different kinds of eligibility requirements, time structures, and repayment periods. So this to us is a really simple fix. Now we talked to Jessica Thompson yesterday from TICAS, Senior Policy Analyst, and she said this about Repay, which is, of course, as you know, the newest repayment plan that's going to start being offered in December. I'm just bringing this up to highlight that in the process of creating these plans, we are getting closer to a better idealistic plan that we can kind of say is the perfect plan. For lack of better words, say it's the perfect plan, and we should use that to streamline the system into one easy to understand, generous offer. So just again, a reminder, just to remind you how complicated it is. These are the 4 current plans. Mind you, there's going to be the 5th one. You see there's 2 different repayment schedules and 3 different monthly repayment amounts. That's very complicated for the borrower. It can be very complicated for you as well, working with your clients. So there is a pragmatic reason to streamline the repayment plans, just so that it's easier to access, easier to work with, and the consequences of choosing plans clearly would be much easier. Again, here's the really complex conditions for eligibility in the repayment plans. I bring this up just to make the note that the reason it's so convoluted, the reason that we have so many plans is because each one of these, in a way, was a compromise in that we are working closer and closer and closer to an ideal plan, like I said. So one point that I really want to stress is it's not just about simplifying the repayment plan, not just about streamlining it, but doing it in a way that is not compromising any of the benefits and consumer protections that we believe borrowers deserve. So that's why we advocate for one plan that takes the 10% discretionary income cap, uses that across the board, and one standard of 20 years, after 20 years of repayment, debt forgiveness. Some people who are opponents to this kind of idea believe that the 20-year forgiveness is much too generous, but I do point out that there's already many other advanced nations, Britain, I believe South Korea as well, that are providing an automatic forgiveness after 2 decades or so. So this fits well within what is already the current, I guess, student loan climate globally. So I don't see why in America we should have a system that's not keeping up to pace with our peers. So I'm going to move back to Maggie, unless anyone has any questions about that simple repayment restructuring.
Cody, could you just go into a little more on where the advocacy for that happens? Is it something that the DOE can do on their own, or is it something that Congress would need to act on, or both? Or could you just talk a little bit more about
Yeah,
that?
you know, I can't talk to the power for the Department of Ed because I am not quite sure exactly what their ability is there. But Congress definitely has the ability to redesign the repayment plans. In fact, there already is some legislation that's aiming to do this, and it's actually encouraging legislation. Now, I don't want to say that we support it because it's not a clean bill, but there is a bill that was co-sponsored by Marco Rubio that suggested repaying or restructuring and streamlining the plans. And I only bring that up to point out that that is someone that's a bit on the other aisle on this issue, and it's encouraging to know that there is maybe some possible movement in Congress and some allies on both sides to make this happen.
Great, thank you, Cody.
No problem. Any other questions?
Nope, that's all for now.
Okay, great. And I'll pass it back to Maggie.
Great, thanks, Cody.
You know, Maggie, I'm sorry. I'll knock through this section and then I think the next one, correct? Sorry about that.
Awesome, yeah.
Awesome. Oh no, please take it away.
Okay, so
I didn't want to cut it on your time, Maggie. I got the slides mixed up. Sorry about that.
Oh, that's totally fine. We've got our technical back end here. So the fourth ask that we are thinking about a lot in the student loan advocacy community is really pretty simple. It's revising and simplifying the tax codes to remove the limits on student loan interest deductions. So essentially similar to the deduction that homeowners get on their taxes. We want to expand the amount of student loan interest deductions available to borrowers that have student loans. So pretty simple. I'm going to the next slide. This is something that actually did exist, you know, prior to tax reform. The interest on any personal loans, including student loan debt, could be deducted, but this broad deduction was eliminated in that 1986 bill, and really the home mortgage interest deduction is what sort of took its place in a way, and that was to encourage home ownership. So currently there is a federal deduction for student loan interest payments, but those deductions are capped at $2,500. So, you know, we really just feel that this is a simple thing that the federal government could do to give additional relief to student loan borrowers who are paying on time, who again are paying these higher interest rates, and really, you know, could benefit hugely from this one shift in the tax code. And then just, you know, there are some proposals that have been put out there about this particular issue. Congressman Chuck Rangel, he did propose the Student Loan Interest Deduction Act that would raise those caps on how much student loan interest, how much the student loan interest deductions could be on your federal taxes. So $5,000 for a single individual and $10,000 for a married individual. So again, you know, these are simple policies that the federal government really should be enacting, given the magnitude of student debt, the amount that's out there, but also just how high these interest rates are for most of these loans compared to the market. So I don't know if there are any questions before we sort of walk through some of the additional current proposals that are out there. Just we wanted to give folks on the call a sense of the landscape around student loan debt and what other types of solutions that are being proposed.
There are no questions right now, so go right ahead.
All right. We'll keep rolling. So the first batch that we just wanted to walk through is that the Department of Education recently put out a series of recommendations on student loans and what needs to be done to really sort of fix some of the issues in the student lending market. This is, you know, of course, we should all remember that the Department of Education is the largest holder of these student loans. Most of student loans in the market are actually loans owed to the Department of Education. So, you know, it's good that they are engaging on this issue. You know, the first sort of big banner recommendation that they had was increasing borrower protections. That includes some of the, you know, what Cody talked through, having a simple single income-driven repayment plan for future borrowers to eliminate some of the confusion and complication. And also, you know, making sure that any student loan discharges or forgiveness that, you know, we've talked a lot about some of the loan forgiveness programs. Currently, you know, if you are in a pay-as-you-earn program and you pay on your student loans for 20 years, whatever is left is forgiven at the end of that time period, at the end of that 20 years. But currently, that loan forgiveness is viewed as taxable income. So that's something that the department had recommended to fix. And really, we talked, again, a lot about some of the additional consumer protections that are needed to make sure that borrowers that are struggling with their loans aren't taken advantage of by these sort of debt relief scams or debt consolidation companies. You know, there really needs to be stronger regulations to make sure that people aren't getting ripped off paying very high fees to essentially enroll in free government programs that are their right to enroll in. And one other thing, just like on refinancing, you know, on borrower protections, there's also a number of state initiatives focused on borrower protections in the market. Connecticut this spring just became the first state to pass a borrower's Bill of Rights. So we'll talk a little bit more about efforts like that, but really making sure that the student lending market has consumer protections commensurate to the mortgage lending market is just important. The second piece is just enhancing data. You know, the portfolio of student loans is so huge, and most of it is, again, as I mentioned, with the Department of Education. But it's essentially, there's not a lot of data out there that's publicly available about that loan portfolio. And one of the things that we've been pushing the department to do, and they put in their recommendations, is essentially, you know, using data to make these processes easier for students. So, for example, if a student wants to enroll in an income-driven repayment program that'll lower their monthly payment based on their income, currently that student has to recertify their income every year, you know, in a way that allows their payments to be set at whatever, you know, level is given for the program that they're in. So we think that with better data on the back end, the department could really automatically recertify those people and programs themselves if there was more data communication among the departments of the federal government. The third bucket here is strengthening servicing, and this to me goes hand in hand with those borrower protections. You know, making sure that borrowers know their options for income-driven repayment programs, making sure that borrowers who may be in an income-driven repayment program and their loan is in negative amortization because of that, essentially, you know, they're in repayment, but they're paying such a low amount, their loan balance is going up. We need to make sure that, you know, on that borrower's credit report, it's reflected that they are in repayment, their loan is in good standing, and they don't have any negative impact on their credit score because they're in an income-driven repayment program. And another piece of this is the last sort of bucket here is you know, private student loans, which we'll talk about a lot more with the CFPB's recommendations. But, you know, making sure that there is an option for bankruptcy and flexibility for bankruptcy in the private student loan market, and really cracking down on some of the more predatory practices in the private market. One of the more egregious practices that happens in the private market is it comes about when most private loans have a cosigner. And we've had borrowers that we've worked with when a cosigner passes away, whether that's a parent or a student, the person that is left with their name on the loan, a lender will go to them and demand the entire loan payment in full. And that's the type of consumer protection that doesn't exist in the student loan market. Right now it is completely legal for private student lenders to do that, and really cracking down on those types of abuses and making sure that students with private loans, you know, have those protections is another big piece of this puzzle. And then really briefly, you know, the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau has done a lot of work very recently on student loan servicing. So looking at the companies that service federal loans. So these are companies like Navient, Great Lakes, Fed Loan Servicing, and, you know, making sure that there are protections in place so that borrowers, you know what their options are, and that servicers are being held accountable for what they're telling borrowers. You know, as many of you who were on the previous webinars know, these repayment plans and forgiveness programs are incredibly complicated, and the federal government needs to be making sure that servicers are doing their due diligence to let people know what their options are for income-driven repayment programs or loan forgiveness. You know, communities like ours and yours, now that, you know, we've done these webinars, we can help sort of fill the gap in education about these programs. But really the long-term solution is making sure that the companies that service these loans are giving people the right information. And the CFPB, as you can see here, outlines sort of the tenets of what sort of a servicing accountability framework would look like, making sure that borrowers are being given consistent information, accurate and actionable information, that if they don't, they're held accountable, especially if there is an error, and that they are transparent about their processes with borrowers. And currently those are not the traits of the student loan service market, so that's something that absolutely needs to get done. So just moving on. I mentioned the note about bankruptcy. Right now it is virtually impossible to discharge your student loans in bankruptcy. A borrower has to prove undue hardship, and in practice that is not an easy process, and it is not something that many borrowers have been successful at. So unlike other types of consumer debts, it is next to impossible to discharge your student loans in bankruptcy. And that's something that Congressman John Delaney and a number of other champions on this issue have proposed changing to make sure that, you know, just like in any other lending market, that safety valve that bankruptcy represents is present in the student lending market. And just going on to the next slide, I mentioned the Borrower's Bill of Rights that Connecticut passed. At the federal level, Senator Dick Durbin also introduced a student loan borrower bill of rights. So again, similar to many of the reforms we're talking about, at both the federal and state level, there's talk about sort of enshrining protections for borrowers into law. Moving on to just another area of work that we wanted to make sure folks know about it's really, you know, most of the policies that we've talked about so far are things that would help people that have student debt now. You know, allowing people that have debt to refinance their loans, making sure they have consumer protection, making sure that they can declare bankruptcy if they get into trouble. But, you know, we could wipe out all $1.3 trillion of student debt if we forgave it all. We still have a system of higher education in this country that's churning out more and more borrowers with higher and higher levels of debt. The average undergraduate in this country graduating with a bachelor's degree is graduating with just under $30,000 in debt on average, and that's just for an undergraduate degree. So this is a continuing crisis. So we need to look out for current borrowers, but also push to pass policies that will stop this crisis from continuing down the road. And that's why you see a lot of organizations and several people talking about the idea of getting back to a system in this country where we have debt-free college or tuition-free college. You know, there are a number of proposals around that sort of messaging, from the president's proposal around free community college to broader programs talking about structuring federal aid in such a way that it would be possible for an individual in this country to go to a public institution and graduate without debt. And that's the North Star that we want to get to. And you can see a few things that Senator Sanders and Secretary Clinton have said on that issue. So that's just to give you a sense of the landscape of all of the different solutions that are being talked about with student debt. There's obviously a lot of work to do, and we are so excited to have your voices as part of this fight. So Cody's going to walk you through some of the advocacy tools about how we're going to get this done and put pressure on policymakers to actually make some of these changes.
Great, thank you so much, Maggie. I just wanted to note, first off, you're totally correct. There are so many different angles that we can take to try to just alleviate the debt burden for the 43 million Americans with student debt. You know, we don't want you guys to forget about big picture ideas. Clearly, as an organization called Student Debt Crisis, we do believe there is a sense of urgency that requires bold, big ideas. But in the meantime, all of those small measures are great ways to help students today, and we would certainly ask you guys to support them. I just want to give you guys some quick advocacy tools, simple ways that you guys can help us and help outreach or help us echo the message and reach as many people as possible. You know, first, the typical ones. We work with Higher Ed Not Debt and many other organizations. Hello, can you guys hear me?
Yeah, sorry, we lost you for a second.
You just came back, Cody.
Oh, okay, great. I started to panic. But anyways, you know, with all of the coalition work we do, some of these simple ways to get involved, sign-on letters, letters to the editor, you know, supporting us with our petition efforts. These are all different ways that you can really minimally get involved and still make a big impact. The last one I really want to emphasize is the story collection. We always describe ourselves at Student Debt Crisis as somewhat of a liaison between everyday working Americans and a really complicated, difficult financial system. I think that's really similar to the work that you guys do, and we can kind of share that endeavor. So part of what we think is really important is sharing individual and personal stories. Because of that, we wanted to get some personal experiences or stories from you guys. And Higher Ed Not Debt graciously built out a site for that. So Maggie, if you want to describe what you guys have and what the purpose is, that'd be great.
Absolutely. So there's a link that's on the screen right now, and Cody will also type it into the chat box. So because we know you're on a webinar, so we know y'all are at your computers. So essentially, this is just a form where we want to hear from you. If you are working with clients who are not able to get into homes because of their student loan debt, or you or your family have been adversely affected by student loan debt, or both, essentially we just want to hear from you and hear what those stories are. So this is just a simple form online. If you're able to take just a couple minutes right now to take, you know, this is the advocacy webinar, so we're asking you to take action now. But filling out this form and letting us know how you see student debt impacting your community and your work would be incredibly helpful. And let me talk about a little bit about how we will use this. So as I said, we're working to talk to members of Congress. We're working to talk to state legislatures. We're working to talk to industry groups about the need to act on student loan debt. And if we can have some powerful and compelling stories to talk not just about the big picture numbers on how student debt is impacting housing in this country, but really be able to convey from the front line, from nonprofit housing counselors, what they are seeing in their community, that could be incredibly powerful. So this may be something where if you fill out the form, we might give you a call to ask you to be featured in a Faces of Student Debt storybook. Or we might ask you to, you know, through Bruce, if there's a push to reach out to elected officials, that might be another piece. But we really want to work with you to lift up sort of what you're seeing on the ground, because like I said, that is just such an important piece of this puzzle. So it'll only take a few minutes. We're just asking you to go ahead and go to this form right now and just fill out sort of how you see student debt impacting your community.
And I'll just quickly mention that we circulated it by the chat box. It's not a link, but you can just copy and paste the URL.
And we can get it out also afterwards. I would also say that it's not just home buyers, but also homeowners. So working with people in foreclosure, that's obviously part of the challenge that people have in making their mortgage payment, is the other debts they've got.
Absolutely.
And I really actually appreciated what Maggie and Natalia and Cody have communicated to us during these webinars, which is that the housing aspect of student debt has not really gotten clearly articulated. So they're turning to us to see if we can't play part of that role. So it'd be very, very valuable if you can spend a few minutes giving examples of client situations or experiences you've had, or with your staff too.
Exactly. Thank you so much, Bruce. I can't stress enough actually how important these testimonials are. Both Student Debt Crisis and Higher Ed Not Debt collect them, and they are just an invaluable resource for enacting change, and also just with being able to reach out to true experiences for inspiration for change. So please do click on that, go to Higher Ed Not Debt's website, and share your experience. One other thing we were going to ask of you, again, like Maggie said, this is the advocacy call, so you know, just some simple ways to get involved can't hurt. We also set up a page on our site, Student Debt Crisis, where you all can just join a simple email list. We're not going to email you with any of our normal asks or anything. It's only going to be for opportunities to get involved or for specific advocacy asks. So if you wouldn't mind signing up for that list so we can reach out to you all when there's opportunities to get you involved in enacting change, that would just be absolutely incredible. And yeah, that's it for me. So last thing, if you guys want to remember, we've got our resources, theborrowers.org, if you need to you know, just refreshen up on some of the repayment plans, or you know, what happens when you default. These are some important resources we've collected for you. Also, the studentloanlawyer.com. Josh isn't with us today, but I'm sure you all remember him. He's our kind of trusted lawyer, so definitely check his site out or reach out to him if necessary. And last, higherednotdebt.org. Please check out their website. You'll also find this testimonials page there where you can share your story as well. So just many different ways that you guys can contact us and get involved.
Great, thank you all so much. And we are just about out of time. Fortunately, we don't have any questions, but we really appreciate both of you sharing on the advocacy. Just one other thing I wanted to quickly mention. Matt Reby from NFCC, who folks will remember on the second call that we did with everyone, the second webinar, they joined and talked about some of the student loan counseling that they're offering. He just wanted to flag as another potential kind of advocacy avenue is that the Department of Education, I guess, does not define counseling in their regs. And so I guess that kind of opens the door for you know, some standard counseling to call itself counseling. And so he just flagged, you know, pushing on DOE to to kind of clearly define counseling and maybe have some minimum standards. But thank you all so much. I'm going to turn back over to Bruce now.
Great. Well, thank you all. Appreciate all that Cody and Maggie have done on the call, and Natalia on the front end work she's done on this. Very helpful. We'll continue being in communication. So, and we'll certainly communicate things through the leaders list as well as through the line that Cody mentioned. One quick reminder before we go. So really consider joining NHRC. We have doing a lot of work to advance housing counseling, and that's the real reason to join. We have kind of beefed up some of our membership benefits, and hopefully you've seen that you now have free access, members have free access to the foundation directory, which is the most comprehensive guide to foundations in the country. And normally it's a $495 at least expense, so this hopefully is helpful to groups. We have our mortgage services escalation contact list, which I know has just gotten a flurry of activity recently, so it's valuable to people. You'll be able to come to the members meeting on the 10th and lunch, which should be great. We did a great round of member webinars this last year. Special thanks to RCAC and Teresa Bardwell, but most of them were about HUD compliance issues, which is what we got requests from you all about, and thought they were very good. We're working on doing another round of different things this coming year. And the discounts on web design, technology, fundraising tools, and now with our partnership with the Center for Responsive Philanthropy, their discounts on Civic CRM, which is a contact management system. There's car rentals, there's consultants, nonprofit consulting and HR if you need that. And we're hoping to have new benefits coming in 2016. So please join. Joining now would be great to get you into 2015 already, but certainly I think we put out a note earlier this week. If you can't join immediately, put us in your budget for 2016, and also plan for some travel. You know, it'd be great if you could plan for 2 trips for NHRC events next year, so that you can come to the national meeting, but also come to one of our lobby events, either in Congress or with the administration. But with that good note, thank you everybody. It's been a great call, and we will talk to you again in on November 19th in 2 weeks. Talk to you, and you know, there'll be plenty of communiques between now and then as well. All right, and plan on coming to our meeting on December 10th. I think it'll be great. Thanks. Bye.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Bruce.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.